Welcome to the Trouble with Writing podcast, where we chat about the real issues that stop multilingual writers producing effective English and see where we can help. Hello, gents. How are you?
Hey, guys.
Hello, Paul. I'm very well, thanks. Welcome back to Pete and Paul. You've both been on a break for a little while. Tell us about it.
Well, my break was forced. I had to have some surgery to an old injured leg, and I've been in recovery, and it's going well. And actually, I didn't work for 3 weeks, so it was kind of a little break from working, and I kind of enjoyed that part of it. I guess I needed it.
Did you manage to get some reading done?
I had very little ability to read because of the drugs that I had to take for the pain. I had these visions of catching up on my reading and maybe watching some films, but the concentration was an issue. So mostly I just sat around moaning and groaning. And Pete, how was your holiday?
Yeah, no, it was great. Thanks. It was a really nice long break. I was telling you before that I went to Portsmouth, just visited, which is near where Phil's from. Also went to Tenerife. That's also near Phil. I'm like following you about, Phil.
Wow, stalker.
And actually, something that I didn't say was I was telling you about the Portsmouth Museum, and there's an amazing part of the museum dedicated to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and especially Sherlock Holmes.
Wow!
So that was really inspiring.
Interesting.
I'm now reading.
I think Dickens. I think Charles Dickens lived in Portsmouth for a bit as well. He's got a a museum house there.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, maybe I'll visit that next time.
Anyone possible.
Yeah.
Well, guys, today we have a very special podcast because we have a guest joining us.
Yes.
Shall we?
Let's go.
For sure. Let me just introduce our guest. Fabio Cerpelloni is a language teacher, writer, and a podcast host from Italy. English became such a great passion that he ended up teaching it professionally in New Zealand, Spain, Ireland, and at the British Council in Milan. As a teacher, he likes to engage learners in stimulating conversations about real books and help them find their craft in their own personal stories so they can expand their expressions and sound more idiomatic and grow as people as a whole. He's a great person. Really looking forward to our chat. Welcome, Fabio.
Hi, Phil. Hi, Pete, and hi, Paul. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Hi, Fabio. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I guess I'll kick off. Fabio, we said that you're a podcast host, and recently I just recorded a session with Fabio to be on his brilliant podcast. So I'm sure he'll chat a bit more about that. Before we get into that, tell us, Fabio, what do you write and how long have you been writing in English?
What do I write? I write blog posts because I have my own blog about language learning. I'm into language acquisition, so I like writing about how we learn languages. And because I'm an English teacher, I write about learning English, basically. I also write university assignments, so academic pieces, because I'm doing a master's degree in language education. So that's another thing that I don't really enjoy writing, but I'm actually going to start writing my dissertation in September. It's a 15,000 word assignment, so it's going to be challenging, I know. I also write personal stories, so nonfiction. I write nonfiction, so personal stories that I then read out on my podcast, and it's like creative nonfiction. So I write things that happened to me that made me reflect. I write all in the present tense. I write these stories in the present tense because that's something that I learned from a a master storyteller from the US. I read a book about this. It's not that I know this person. And so blogs. I'm a ghostwriter for a couple of websites, including IELTS.org. So I write articles for IELTS.org. And that's it. Yeah. So, and the other question was, you said, how long? You asked me how long. Okay. Well, I took 3 language exams, the IELTS, CPE, and FC. So the Cambridge B2 first, Cambridge C2 proficiency. And I started writing in English because of those exams, actually, because I had to write, the essays. I think B2, Cambridge B2 first was about writing a story. I had to write a story, if I remember well. But anyway, I started writing because I had to pass an exam. And then when I took my Delta, I took the Cambridge Delta, which is an advanced teaching qualification. I had to write assignments there. So that's basically, I've been writing for, I would say, for 10 years. Not consistently.
Wow.
Not consistently.
It sounds like you're going to have a lot of letters after your name soon. You got the Masters, the CPE, the Delta. You know, got an MBE coming up or something.
No, but Cambridge, I'm sure Cambridge, I'm a good Cambridge client. So yeah, I didn't tell you that I'm writing my own book also on how I learned English. Yeah, and I'm having a lot of fun writing this book. It's basically a collection of personal stories on what I did to learn English, and each story ends with a message that tells you how to learn a language. But each chapter contradicts the next. So in one chapter I say, look up words in a dictionary every time you meet an unknown word. And I explain why, because that's what I used to do. But in the next chapter, I say, you shouldn't look up words. You should learn unconsciously. So don't worry about, don't bother with highlighters and dictionaries. Just focus on the message, because that's what I did. And I explain what I did. So, yeah, this is... Sorry, maybe I've been going on for too long.
It's great. Fabio, I have a question for you. I've actually read some of your blog posts, and they're really fascinating. One of the things I noticed is how well traveled you are. I think in one of the blogs you mentioned you've either visited or worked in 20 different countries. Is that...
Yes. I have visited 20 countries because I first moved to London in 2011, and that's where I started learning English, when I seriously started learning English. Then I moved to Australia, and I lived there for 2 years. My visa in Australia expired, and I moved to New Zealand, where I stayed for 2 years. And before coming back to Italy in 2017, I traveled in Southeast Asia for 6 months. And in 6 months, I visited, I think, 10, 12 countries. So I've traveled quite a bit, but I don't travel as I used to, because now I have a mortgage and can't do that.
Here's a quick question, follow-up question. How important do you think those experiences of traveling are for your writing?
Oh, for my writing, I'm not sure. Traveling helped me improve my writing. But traveling, well, living in English-speaking countries for sure, that was really helpful for my speaking, I would say. But for my writing, if you mean writing
stories,
is
like the ideas and stories, that's what I'm thinking about.
Oh, okay. So in terms of content, a lot. I would say a lot. Yeah. Most of my stories, actually, the stories that I told on my podcast, wouldn't be there if I hadn't traveled. So I have a story called Home, which is basically connected to my experience in Australia. But yeah, traveling gave me a lot of stories to tell, that's for sure.
Did you starting? I mean, you talked about you started to write in English when you wrote, boring IELTS essays, essay responses and stuff. But do you think when did your other writing sort of start? Is that connected to language learning, or is that something that related to like just a part of your life when you began writing your own stories and blogs?
Yeah, I think I started writing consistently when I started my podcast, because I had to. I wanted to write the full story. I wanted to script the full story and then read it aloud on the podcast. So that happened in 2021, September 2021. If you listen to my first story, is like I think it's terrible. Then I improved, and then with my blog, I've realized that I've studied language acquisition. I've studied, I did the Delta, this teaching qualification, and I had to write master's degree level assignments. So I realized, well, I know quite a bit about language education, so language acquisition, so I can transform my academic English, my academic assignments into a blog post that learners of English can actually understand and enjoy. I don't think they want to. I mean, as a learner of English, I never read academic papers. So yeah, I'm trying to maybe make it more accessible for them, so they can also become more independent, right? If they know how a second language is learned. Don't you think? Like
one little follow-up question.
Sure.
So because you've studied a lot, right? It's your Delta, your masters, right? You know a lot about learning English as a foreign language. So I wanted to ask you, do you have like one approach that you're able to summarize for learning to write in English as a foreign language? That might be a difficult question, but do you have like just one approach that?
Well, reading helped me a lot, really a lot. And actually, I listened to your podcast where you talk about, like, you can't make a cake if you have never tried one, right? That was in one of your episodes, and that's absolutely true. Like when I started writing when I started writing academic papers, I was able to write them because I had read a lot of academic papers at that point. And so reading what you're going to write, that's super useful. And also, I would say using dictionaries helped me a lot. I still use dictionaries because that's something that sometimes I still have those doubts. Is this the right pattern? Is this the right preposition? What other word can I use here in this sentence? Because I've already used it in the previous sentence. So I use the Oxford Dictionary mostly, but then I also use the Collocation Dictionary, that word that I can never pronounce, the thesaurus, something. How do you pronounce that?
Thesaurus.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. That one. And now, to be honest, I'm also using ChatGPT to check if sometimes I don't know if the sentence is clear, and I say, I don't know what's your opinion about this, but I just type the sentence and I ask, is this sentence clear enough? And sometimes I get, well, it's clear, but it could be improved in this way. So it's just another tool that I'm using now to not to improve, but to improve, to make it easier for me to write.
I think that sounds like a sort of good use of AI, using it as a tool to paraphrase, to rewrite and check. I guess it's difficult to know why it's saying yes or no, but generally it will have some rules as to like writing in a more plain English, like concise or clear way. So I guess that sounds like a good use of it. I also just wanted to touch on what you said about like rewriting academic papers as posts. I wanted to bring in Paul on that. What do you think about that? I found it quite interesting. I mean, should we be doing more of that?
I think it's a great idea, and I did notice that on your website that you had mentioned that you're transforming these things into blog posts and so on. I think it's a great idea because it activates the learner in a different form, to apply the language in a different way, in different media, and that opens up different possibilities and different ways to use the language, even though the topic may be consistent. I thought it was a really great idea. Really great idea.
Thanks.
Really good for readers too. I don't know if you know about the website, The Conversation, but that
No.
I don't know who it's funded by, but some various arts councils and universities, and they get academics to write on academic subjects, but in a more palatable way. So it's kind of like a news and culture website with, new study on X, but it's written in a way which is not like off-putting to general readers. So I think that's a cool idea.
I also love the idea of taking your story as a learner and turning that into a book. I mean, if you're learning, one of the things that happens to a learner of a language is they may get discouraged at some point, or they may feel alone or really daunted when they travel and they can't communicate to the level they want. Reading a book about someone who shared that experience, I think, could be very powerful. So kudos to you for doing that. That's great. Sorry, I think I cut you off, Pete.
No worries. I was just going to add that, I also think this is a great idea. We've talked a little bit about this before. So sometimes academic writers, they sometimes have this misconception that they have to sound, very complex and intelligent, and it actually it's bad for the reader, right? So they alienate a lot of readers. Their work becomes inaccessible, right? So what you're saying, Fabio, this is it's a great exercise for academic writers, and it really benefits readers. It just gives so many more people access to knowledge.
I wonder why why do we have to write in such a wordy way? Like, can't we just write informal with an informal tone? Well, not informal, but maybe in an easier I don't even know what I'm saying, but
like clear and readable.
More readable, yeah. Something that even people who are not specialized, people who do not have the knowledge, can understand. But I also understand that it's it's for a different audience, probably. Like, so researchers would write for researchers.
I think,
I guess,
in my experience with academic writing, I think over time the culture of academic writing has gotten away from itself. I mean, initially, writing at that level is a way of addressing highly complex issues, right? Research matters, scientific matters, complex things that require a complex explanation. But I think what's happened within the academic culture, maybe over the last century or two, is that, when people are earning their PhDs, they try to impress each other. They try to impress the professor with their ability not just to understand the complexity of the topic, but to express it with overly complex language. But I think the real best academic writing writes it very clearly and simply and saves the occasional complex term for when it's unavoidable, But I think the culture of it has just, what's the word? It's chased its own tail too much, Phil?
Yeah, I agree with you, Paul. I think good point. And it's probably due to like research grants and like what's happening in the world of higher education stuff. But I usually rail against like wordy, horrible academic writing.
Yeah.
My clients and students know that I absolutely loathe words like thus and henceforth. But I wanted to stick up for academic writing in that I think the reason it's still necessary to get students and writers, in whatever language, to conform to a strict pattern of what's acceptable is because it teaches us just to do just that. Nowadays there's a billion different forms, billion different contexts of digital writing, and the fact is most people don't know how to fit their ideas into that right parameter, right? Whether it's a social media post or a company newsletter or something. And academic writing is this framework for like, this is how we structure a paragraph. This is the kind of words we use, and it trains people to get up to speed on one certain type of writing.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
I agree. Absolutely. I think the need is the academic essay, for example, or research paper has a form and a structure that allows you to pour into it complex topics in a way that makes them clear, but it also trains you to use the various forms of logic to express your idea, a complex idea, logically for the benefit of the reader. And students need to practice that so they can do it intellectually, verbally, and in writing. So I still think there's a need for it. 100%. I have a question for you, Fabio. Fabio, I'd like to know, what's your greatest strength as a language learner?
I was very motivated, very, very motivated to learn English. And the more I noticed that I was improving my English, the more I wanted to improve it. And when I realized that I could even teach it, I remember I was in London. I went to IH London to attend a presentation on the CELTA course, like a teaching certificate. And I actually talk about this in my book as well. And I realized, wow, this could become my job. Like I could teach English for a living, because I didn't know that even non-native English speakers could teach the language. And that made me even more motivated. So in that moment, I said, okay, this is what I'm aiming for now. So I had a clear goal. I think that if you know why you're learning, everything becomes easier because you have a goal. It's not just, I want to learn because we need English in this world. That's probably it's too vague. But when I was in London, I started communicating with other people who were not Italians. So I started having conversations with people who, from different cultural backgrounds, and that was what motivated me to do it. And I don't think I have. No, another thing was I've never seen learning English. I've never considered learning English as a chore. So I've met quite a few learners who feel frustrated because they can't speak fluently or they don't understand the grammar, and that brings them down. So it's not. It doesn't help them. But that to me didn't really happen to me. To me, it was like playing football. I love playing football, and it's not something. It's not like, oh my God, how should I kick the ball here? Should I? What should I do? No, I was just playing football. You just do it because you like it, and that was. I think I was lucky, in a way, and it made everything easy for me. So I don't know if this is a strength or it's something that just happened. But I don't have any special talent or something that only I can do that other learners don't have. I think motivation played a big role in my language learning journey. Yeah, I don't know if I answered the question.
For sure. All about goals, motivation, right? I just wanted to pick up on something you said about talking to people from lots of different cultural backgrounds. And I wanted to ask you about how important do you think it is that there is diversity in the English writing world, right? So you're an Italian writing in English. Probably you know a lot of people who write in English who are not native speakers. And how important do you think that is, that there is diversity?
Well, English is the global language, isn't it? So, I mean, it's. I think it's essential because English doesn't belong to you guys anymore because you're all native speakers. It belongs to us, and well, to us, I mean, it belongs to the world, right? It's the global language. So there is this controversial thing going on, even with IELTS, with exams. They discriminate people? Maybe they have brilliant ideas. There are engineers who are highly skilled, but they can't work in Australia, for example, because they don't have enough English. I mean, is that, or they can't write papers in English? I think we should support these people. We shouldn't say, well, you can't write in English, so sorry, we can't accept you here. You can't work for us. It's a waste of talents, a waste of skills. I don't know. I think I've watched a TED talk about this many years ago as well.
So it's a difficult topic, isn't it? Because obviously we need some kind of framework and like the rules of use for English. But to answer, what I think about what Pete asked you of, is diversity good? I think is not only good, but it's essential, because it's not just like, oh, multilingual writers get to use English and like they can communicate with native speakers too. Is that you can transfer ideas from your culture to other cultures, and throughout the history of English speaking countries, should we say, that cultural transfer has been sort of one way. And, now it's great that we can have it the other way as well. And we can learn a lot from writers from, wherever they come from, or people wherever they come from. But yeah, it's sort of difficult topic, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's also it's representing, right, people from different cultures, right? So if imagine a world where only English native speakers wrote in English, then we wouldn't be representing a lot of other people who use English but are from different cultures. So it's about representation, and like what you said, Phil, it's it's different perspectives, right? It's all it's building bridges, it's learning from each other. So yeah, essential.
I agree. I wouldn't agree if it wasn't maybe if English wasn't a global language, but because it's a global language, I mean, we all have the right to use it and write in it.
Sure, yeah.
Fabio, I have a question for you. You've had a great English learning journey, and now you write prolifically. What is the greatest challenge you face when writing in English? What's the biggest challenge you faced?
Punctuation.
One of my favorites.
Using punctuation always, it gives me a headache because I never know. I mean, I know how to use it, of course. I know where to put the full stop and the comma, but there are certain things, like trivial things, that I don't know if they really add meaning to the text, if they're really essential. Like the full stop, should it be before the speech marks or after? Before inside the parentheses or outside? This is something that I'm always like, I've never understood, and I can tell I'm quite lazy, because I should get a punctuation book or probably watch one of your videos.
So some of those little things, like just those little examples you gave there, sometimes it's just depending on the publication, right? So they have their own style guide. Sometimes it's American or British, right? The differences there too. I mean, a general tip, I think, for punctuation is that there are guidelines, right? So it's good to learn these rules, right? But then, if you read good writers, they break the rules all the time, right? But they break them knowingly. They know they're breaking them, right? So yeah, I think one thing to be careful about is taking it too literally with the rules, right? So thinking that we always have to follow these rules. It's important to know them, but then at the end of the day, it's all about being clear for our readers.
So can we break them unknowingly?
Well, it depends on the rule, doesn't it? Like some are going to be more important than others. So sometimes if you break a rule unknowingly, it might, like you said, change the meaning. So we have to be careful of that. So yeah, it's best to know the rules, and then break them knowingly is better.
I think in that one of the hazards of breaking rules, especially as a learner, if you write something like that, someone will assume that you've made an error. Whereas if you're a widely famous published novelist, they won't assume it's an error. They will assume it's a stylistic choice because you've been through an editing process. You've been asked about it by your close confidant editor, and you've said, no, I want it like that. But if you're a language learner, your editor or your instructor or whomever you're writing for, they're going to assume it's an error and that you've made it unknowingly. So it's kind of a hazard.
I think that's a good point on sort of discrimination that some writers face, is that,
Absolutely.
you know, you're going to look at somebody's name, or, you know, people do this, they shouldn't, and make an assumption, oh, that person's not a native speaker, they've made an error and they didn't mean to do it, or they've done it unknowingly. Yeah. And I think I'd agree with Pete, it's good to know the rules, that's for sure. And my quick advice on punctuation would be to keep it quiet, because nobody reads a sentence or a book to check out how many commas and exclamation marks there are. It's like they want to know what the words mean. And so punctuation should just quietly guide the reader how to do that. And, you know, nowadays we see a lot of crazy punctuation used to try and get attention. And it's not necessarily best practice. So I'd say on it.
I only use the full stop, the comma, and the double dash. That's all I use. I don't use the semicolon. I've never used it in my life.
Episode on punctuation, couldn't we? Yeah. Fighting each other about semicolons. I've got a question for you, Fabio. I'm going to ask the next question, which is, you run reading groups and discussion groups and things. What do you like to read? How does that influence your writing as well?
Non-fiction. 90% of the things that I read are non-fiction. So I like reading about pop philosophy, storytelling, so how to write stories, how to tell stories. I like reading factual stuff, like but even maybe about nutrition. One of, if I see my books here, autobiographies as well. Anything that's real. I'm not interested in fiction, and I know that this is, you know, I don't want to say, well, don't read fiction, but it's not something that interests me. I'd rather read something that that comes from an expert in the field, and learn from them. And because I write nonfiction, I think I should read nonfiction. I'm not interested in, you know, descriptive language. Actually, if I read a book, a real novel in English, I think I would struggle. I tried to read Stephen King, and I found it difficult because the language is so colorful. There are so many adjectives that I've never seen before. So, you know, this is also something that makes me think about levels. So I got the C2 proficiency, but then I read a real book. Probably I wouldn't understand it because I don't have enough language, because I didn't read a lot. I haven't read a lot of fiction. Most of what I've read in my life is nonfiction, even in English. So I think it goes back to that analogy with the cake. So if you can't, you will never be able to bake a cake if you've never seen one. Well, probably you will.
Hey,
but
Fabio.
how hard is it going to be? Yeah.
If you can't read a book, read a cake. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
Pete.
I was going to ask you. So you mentioned books about storytelling. So, is there one book or one or two books that you would recommend our listeners?
Absolutely, yes. I actually opened a book club to read this. It's called Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. it's the book that made me start a podcast. It's the book that made me want to tell my own stories. Before reading that book, I'd never really shared a lot about myself, even on social media. Actually, my Facebook account was dead. Not that now, I post selfies or anything, but I share more of myself because I read that book, and I share stories in the form of stories now. So Storyworthy by Matthew Dix, and also there's another one called How to Tell a Story by the Moth. I don't know if you know the Moth, the podcast. It's a storytelling organization in the US, and they run these storytelling events where, one person goes on stage and tells a story, personal story that must be true. And I read that one, very useful as well. But my favorite is Storyworthy. Yeah.
Great.
Great recommendations.
Great.
Absolutely. Since you're recommending things, Fabio, I wonder if you have some tips for multilingual writers. What approaches have helped you develop your writing ability?
I would tell them not to feel discouraged if they think they don't have enough grammar and vocabulary, because actually that's not. I mean, when you're a non-native writer in any language, you might feel, well, I don't know enough grammar, I don't have enough words, but that's only 25% of what writing involves, right? Also in IELTS, I think one of the IELTS criteria, I think it's 25%, the assessment criteria. But anyway, so don't worry if you feel you don't have enough grammar, if you feel you don't have enough vocabulary. You can always use dictionaries. So learn how to use dictionaries, I would say, because that has helped me really a lot. I'm always using dictionaries, even today. Like I can see here, it's on my what's it called, the bookmark, on the bar on my browser. I've got the Oxford and the Collocation Dictionary.
I love how you mentioned Collocations Dictionary. That's something I recommend too, and is so useful for language learners, because it's what makes a lot of sentences and text sound natural and sort of appealing is collocations, which are going to be different in different languages. So that's a great tip, I think. I don't know, is there a specific one you use?
Oxford Collocation Dictionary. There's also the app, which is not free. But these two, basically. Actually, it's the Learner's Dictionary, Oxford Advanced Learner's Dictionary, because it's got more information. And I've been using it, well, since I started learning English, and I'm still using it.
That's a good tip.
I write for I write for Cambridge, but then I use the Oxford Dictionary anyway.
Great. What you're saying? What you're saying about vocabulary and grammar, right? So I think maybe a good thing to say at this point is it's learning by doing, right? So
yeah.
So you write, you read, and you write, and then you're picking up vocabulary and noticing vocabulary, and then when it comes to grammar, you're getting feedback, right? But the danger is when learners, they say, "Oh, I don't have grammar, I don't have the vocabulary, so I won't write until I have the vocabulary and grammar." That's the mistake, right? It's much better or it's essential, I would say, to learn by doing.
Absolutely. It's like speaking, right? You can't wait until you have perfect grammar and vocabulary to open your mouth and have a conversation. You learn by having conversations. And I've never taken a writing course. Probably, I don't know. Probably I should. I don't know. Maybe I will improve. But I've learned by writing. And if I go back and I read my first blog posts, like, to me, that it's like my first story on my podcast. Like, I feel embarrassed, and I think that's a good thing, because if you don't feel embarrassed by what you did in the past, or if you don't feel embarrassed, okay, but maybe this is I don't know if it's a good tip or not, but you should feel embarrassed by what you wrote 1 year ago and see how crap it is.
No, right,
I don't know if you would agree with this.
Definitely, yeah, it's a process, right? So you always want to have your
Yeah.
glass half full. You're always going to, now you're going to be better than you were before. And yeah, you're always improving, right? So learning to write is a process. So definitely you shouldn't feel embarrassed about how you wrote before. Hey, so I have one final question for you, Fabio.
Sure.
Where can listeners find you online? And do you have any events or publications coming up you want to tell us about?
Thank you for this question. It's all on my website. So Fabio, I don't know how to pronounce it, because I should pronounce it in English. In English, it's pronounced Cerpelloni, but in Italian, it's Cerpelloni. So FabioCerpelloni.com. It's all there. I'm on Medium as well. And publications, well, the biggest project I'm working on right now is my little book, which is actually, it's going to be shorter than my dissertation in September, because the word count for my book is around 13,000 words. I don't know how many pages that will be, but it's a tiny book. And the dissertation that I have to write is 15,000 words. So, yeah. So my website and my book that will be published, I think, this summer.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Fabio. And I recommend to all our listeners that you check out Fabio's very cool podcast where he tells his stories and tells you how to tell stories as well. Yeah, I think that's it for today. Brilliant to have you on. And
thank you.
All the best with your writing in the future.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much for having
Fabio.
me.
Great to meet you, Fabio.
All right, see you next time.